Hi, this is Peter Linder with an introduction to my new framework, Apollo on the Couch. It's a framework for building GraphQL APIs with the Apollo GraphQL server backed by Couchbase. The main inspiration for this framework is Ruby on Rails, which was a game changer when it came, but Ruby on Rails, of course, has 5 huge sub-optimalities that I aim to fix with this new framework. The first one is scalability. Ruby on Rails didn't scale seamlessly from startup to millions of operations per second. The second is reliability. Ruby on Rails required lots of infrastructure work to become enterprise grade reliable. Third is capability. Ruby on Rails didn't support full text search and analytics out of the box, both of course very important use cases. Four is cost effectiveness. Ruby on Rails required a lot of infrastructure work to be able to run cost effectively when you got some load on it. Five is REST versus GraphQL. Ruby on Rails default API was REST, which is suboptimal in so many ways compared to GraphQL. You can get some much better developer experience, and you need to build much less stuff to get what you want for the API. So with Apollo on the couch, you get all of the benefits that were really the game changers behind the Ruby on Rails approach, and all of the above mentioned sub-optimalities fixed out of the box with amazing developer and DevOps experience all the way from startup to millions of operations per second. So let's get started. The prerequisites to be able to do what I'm about to show you is to have Couchbase Capella account, which is the managed version of Couchbase, or your own Couchbase server. I just going to show you how to do this with a Couchbase server on your laptop. But you can easily do the same with a Couchbase Capella account. Node.js, I've only tested this because I'm such an early stage in the development of this framework, so I've only tested it with version 18. I heard someone try to run it with v20 and run in some problems, but it was fixed when he came back to version 18. You need npm or similar, and then you're ready to create your first Apollo on the Couch project. You can just copy and paste this line of code to create your project. Let's do that. That's not going to work because I've already have something called that. So let's do version like 34. You can call it whatever you want. So here we're creating my server 34. So this will take like 20 or 30 seconds. And while we're waiting for that, we can create our user to be able to access the database. And since this is just a local database with no access possible from the outside world, we can just call the username and the password. And we'll just give full admin access just to be able to quickly show you how this works. And of course you would want to adjust that for your purposes. So now this should be very soon completed. There we go. Fantastic. So now we can just open up our code in our favorite editor. Now we can go back to the instructions. We should configure the Couchbase environment variables in the .env file with Couchbase user. And of course you would want to set the username and password to be whatever you want it to be. And then there we go. And as you can see here, we have already created a .ignore file where we ignore the .env file, so this won't be checked into your Git repository. And we then generate a resource. So in Apollo Couchbase, this is the reference name for the Apollo on the Couch project. The GraphQL schema and resolvers are structured in units called resources. A resource will typically be similar to a REST resource with CRUD operations, but it can generally be whatever kind of group of function that makes sense for your purposes. If you want your resource to be similar to a typical REST resource, you can use the scaffolding script that I've created called generated resource, to generate a new resource. This script will generate resources with scaffold, resolvers, and schema files that you can edit to fit your purposes. You can also choose to create your resources manually if you want a different structure. So this is, of course, standing on the giant of Ruby on Rails. We had this kind of structure. To create the resource using the scaffolding script, you can just copy paste this code. So I will just create a resource called books for this example, called books, and we create that. So what will happen now is that we will, oh look, we haven't saved the environment file, so we don't have access to the Couchbase server, which means that we can't create the collection and index, which will now be created. So we can now go back into the Couchbase server and look that we have a new collection called books, and we have an index, a primary index on this new collection, so we can query for documents in that collection. All right, back to the instructions. So as you can see here now, we have a new code structure generated under the source GraphQL resources directory, and this new directory is called books. And in books we have a schema file, and here you can see here the book content. So here you would say what your properties are that you want for this resource, and at the bottom you can see the endpoints created. So much like in Rails, again standing on a giant of Ruby on Rails, we have an automatic linking between the API endpoint and the code that resolves that endpoint. So we have by naming convention the resource name followed by the action on that resource. So if you then look at the mutation, under the mutation directory we have a file called create. So automatically I've linked this endpoint to the function called resolver in this file. So whatever happens in here is what will happen when this endpoint is called on the API. And if we go to the top, we can see here replace with your fields. So here we can now go back to our instructions. We should edit, fill in the properties that you want to expose on your resource. Let's just follow the example here and give this resource two properties called name and ISBN, where the name is required and the ISBN number is not required. And you will of course customize this for your purposes. We'll just copy this in here, and then we have something called books list filter inputs. This means when you're doing a list query, you can query on, for example, name. So here is one thing to note is that we have types, which is basically some data heading out from the API, and then we have input, which is data coming into the API, and that's just by definition in GraphQL. So now we see that we have book content input. So this is used for when we're creating a book or when we are replacing a book. And then we want to make sure that there's always a name property and there's an optional property called ISBN. Now, if we just want to patch a book, we don't want to require the name property, because we want to be able to just send in the ISBN number without sending in a name. So here we remove the exclamation mark just to be able to set the ISBN. And as you can see in the endpoints here on replace, we have book replace input, and we have a book content. So book replace input is just content book content input. But on book patch input, we have book content patch input, which is this here. So that means that when you're calling the endpoint book replace, we're just mapping it to this this input type, which doesn't require a name property, which is exactly what you want. So now we have a create, delete, patch, replace, and we can do get by IDs, and we can do get list. All right, so let's go back to the instructions. And if we follow along here, we can see that now we should run the generate GraphQL types, because in my framework we have support for TypeScript, of course. So all of this is built around TypeScript, and now we generate the TypeScript types from the schema file. So now you can access all of these types in TypeScript. That's not going to work because we didn't save the schema file first, so we need to rerun that. And now we can actually start the server. Run dev. So let's see what happens if we click on this. So this is one of the amazing things with Apollo server, is that we have access to this UI when we can start playing around with our endpoints. And we can now, for example, create a book by just choosing which fields to. We're just going to care about the name for now. So in the contents, we're just going to select name, and in the name, let's give this intro to Apollo on the couch. All right, and let's create that book. We have a book created, and let's see that that actually got created in Couchbase. We can check out documents. In books, yeah, intro to Apollo on the couch. So we can now change the name of that to version 2 and save that. And then we can go back to the UI for Apollo server, and we can query for that new book that we created by ID. So we can go back here, we can take the ID, and we can get the book with that ID. So we just care about the name, and if there's any errors, we would want to see what those are. And here we have an array with IDs that we want to fetch. Query, intro to Apollo on the couch version 2. So now you have a fully functional GraphQL API. And the amazing thing is that this API is so easy to customize for your purposes, and it's super scalable out of the box. You can just scale it up from whatever we have right now to millions of operations per second. Of course, that requires that you have a more scalable front end than what I had right now. It's very easy to upload Apollo server on, for example, AWS Lambda, which would make it kind of infinitely scalable, or whatever other kind of scalable infrastructure you would choose for your purposes. And then it's just super reliable. Just out of the box, we have enterprise grade reliability, just because Couchbase is just an amazing database. It's so much better than all other databases, both in terms of scalability and reliability, and of course capability as well. Just because we have Couchbase, we have out of the box full text search and analytics, and cost effectiveness as well, because Couchbase is so much more cost effective than any other database to run at scale. And we have REST versus GraphQL. We have like amazing GraphQL with amazing developer experience. So yeah, you have this really capable server, and it just takes 10 minutes to set it up, not even, and you're ready to run. now, so the next steps from on the roadmap for this project is to build security, of course. Just gonna build with set it up somehow with OpenID Connect or just installing certificates that I can use to check JWTs. Make it easy to also upload it to AWS Lambda. Also, yeah, so I would really love to get your feedback on what you would want to see on the roadmap. I would love to get your submissions for any additions you would like to make. And if you have any questions, just general comments, I would really love to hear what those are. So yeah, just click subscribe and the like button. Yeah, thanks for this time.